Hi guys, a very warm welcome to today's class. For today we'll be starting with the first chapter of sociology. Now I want you guys to know it's very important that we also have chapter 1 called Introducing Society. So I'll quickly go over that chapter in another video, but for today's class we'll be straight away starting with demographic structures of Indian society. Now a few things I want you guys to understand is that when we talk about sociology and when you're writing the paper, you have to be very careful with the way you understand and formulate your answers, right? So you have to be very objective, but at the same time, when you're writing your answers, you have to write them in a very subjective manner. Now, what do I mean by that? So when you're trying to understand, we'll go step by step. Take a moment, pause the video, think what comes to your mind whenever we talk about a specific subject, a specific topic, So, how do you relate it with your everyday life, or how can you expand upon it? This will help you develop your critical thinking skills, which will eventually help you out while writing your answers for your boards. Also, guys, you will also be getting the notes for these chapters. So, in case you guys want the notes, just comment down notes down below and I'll share it with you. Now, guys, when we talk about sociology, it is very vital in the Indian scenario, particularly because India is a pluralistic society. What I mean by pluralistic society is that India is made up of multiple cultures, and when these cultures interact with one another, a lot of new cultures come into place and a lot of new social processes come into play, right? And throughout this course, your entire class 12 syllabus, we'll be trying to understand these various dimensions of our Indian society and how these different social processes and institutions come into play and how they affect our daily lives. Now, the thing about sociology is it's a subject which is very generic, but at the same time very specific also, right? So we have to be very careful when we are applying these things, because we have to be very sensitive also when we are talking about sociology, right? So let's get started for today's class. And the mode of this class will be both English and Hindi. So what I'll try to do is, first I'll go on in English, and then wherever necessary, if I think there is further explanation required, I'll also go on about it in Hindi, right? Demographic structures of Indian society. Now, this term demographic might seem new to you, so let us try and understand what this means. So, demography is the systematic study of population, and what we mean by that is whenever we try to study population in a systematic manner, that is known as demography. Now, the word demography has come from a Greek origin and is composed of two words. One is demos, which means people, and the second is graphene, which means to describe, right? Now, this can come as a one marker, so you will find the exact complete definition in the notes. So you can look forward to that. And while I'm narrating these classes, you can take your notes alongside so that you remember what we studied in the class. So let's come on to the next point. There are two types of demography, formal and informal. So when we talk about formal demography, demography is primarily quantitative in nature. Quantitative is that which deals with numbers. जब sociology को numbers के through समझने की कोशिश करते हैं, that is known as quantitative demography, quantitative studies or formal demography, right? Next comes informal demography. So whenever we talk about anything apart from quantitative fields such as the social, economical, or even the political aspects of populations, in that case it becomes informal demography, right? So both of these we're talking about demography, one in quantitative, the other we can say in qualitative terms such as social, economic and political, right? Okay, now you need to understand that all demographic studies are based on processes of counting or enumeration such as the census or survey. So कहाँ से हमें ये data मिलता है? We get this data from census or survey. And जब भी हम population को count करने की कोशिश करते हैं, this entire process comes under demography, right? Now, these involve systematic collection of data on the people residing within a specific territory. So whenever we talk about demography, you need to keep it in mind that we are talking about a specific territory and the people living in that specific territory, right? All right. So a few important pointers. So the first modern census was the American census of 1790. Okay, so 1790 में जो first American census हुआ था, that was the very first modern census we had. Then we had the regular decennial census in British India. So British India में जब decennial censuses start हुए, it was 1881. Okay, this is very important, guys. Now, the first census of independent India again becomes very important. So once our country got independent, the first census that was taken was in 1951. Can you guys tell me when was the recent census done? Write it down in the comments below. All right, let's move on to the next portion. So let's talk about the importance of demographic data. So अभी तक we have tried to understand कि demography क्या होता है, two types of demography जो हमें पता है अभी तक वो क्या होता है, अलग अलग census हुए थे, census का significance क्या है, census क्या होता है, पर अब इसकी ज़रूरत क्यों है? So let's try and take a look at that. So the planning and implementation of state policies. So when we talk about state policies, you guys need to understand that whenever a state policy is formulated, first a certain background of that area is taken into consideration for whom the policy is being formulated. So the entire process, in such a process, the demographic data becomes very important, because अगर पता ही नहीं है किसके लिए आपको कुछ करना है, then how can you do that thing, right? So planning and implementation of state policies. Second, justification of sociology as a discipline. What do I mean by that? So guys, this is something we will learn in higher classes, and by that I mean probably in your college, that how did sociology come as a discipline. Next we have Durkheim's study on suicide. Now this becomes important because इसमें we talked about data, demography was studied, and Emile Durkheim, he was one of the founding fathers of sociology. Mind you, I said one of the founding fathers of sociology, and he studied suicide rates, okay, and how these suicide rates are dependent. He tried to study the patterns and tried to formulate the theory that suicide is not just dependent on individual factors but also on social factors. So this is where it becomes very important, because you guys need to understand that when he was conducting this entire study, during those times, it was usually thought that suicide is a personal matter, it's on an individual level. But he studied the suicide rates and found out that the rate of suicide is also dependent on social factors and not just independent individual factors, right? Now, next we talk about formal versus social demography. Now, formal demography, again, like we had studied earlier, it is the quantitative form. Let's elaborate a little more on that. So formal demography is primarily concerned with the measurement and analysis of the components of population change. Okay, this is the first statement. Second, so basically it focuses on the quantitative analysis, right? For which it has a highly developed mathematical methodology which is suitable for forecasting population growth and changes in the composition of population. Next, we come to social demography, which is also called population studies. So this is very important, guys. What is the another name for social demography? It's population studies. So this form of demography inquires into the wider causes and consequences of population structures and change. So basically, quantitative tells us the numbers. Social demography or population studies tells us about the qualitative aspect of it, that why and how that happens, right? So social demographers believe that social processes and structures regulate demographic process. They trace the social reasons that account for population trends. So we have population trends, right? So how these trends take place, what is the underlying pattern behind it? This is what social demographers have tried to, find answers to across time. Now let's move on to the Malthusian theory of population growth. So this theory was propounded by the English political economist Thomas Robert Malthus. So he argued that the human population grows at a faster rate than the rate at which the resources grow. as a result, humanity is condemned to live in poverty forever. So he said that the human population always grows at a faster rate, so resources do not grow as much. As a result, there will be less food, less resources for the humans, and thus, as a result of which, there will be poverty prevalent, right? So he said, quoting, humanity is condemned to live in poverty forever because the growth of agricultural production will always be overtaken by population growth. Okay. Next, so according to his theory, he said the human population grows in geometric progression, whereas the agricultural production grows in arithmetic progression. Now, these are some mathematical terms, but I'll try to explain it in a simpler manner. So, by geometric progression, we mean that, so let's start with the number 2. So, the next will be 4, 8. So, the growth is happening at a much faster rate than the in compared to the arithmetic progression. So let's compare the two. So it's 2, we start at 2, but here it's 2, 4, 8, 16, or 2 to the power 1, 2 to the power 2, 2 to the power 3, or 2 to the power 4, and so on. So it is an exponential growth, whereas this is an arithmetic growth. So it's 2 bracket 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus and so on, right? So if you see the numbers, so it's the first two are the same, but the next one, here it's 8, here it's 6. Here it's 16, here it's 8. So basically the growth is happening much faster than this one, right? So this is what he's trying to explain through his geometric versus arithmetic progression. I hope I have been able to explain it in a simple manner. If not, if you guys want a detailed explanation on this, please let me know, okay? Now, he said that population grows at a geometric progression, which is basically he means that population grows at a higher rate than agricultural production, which grows in an arithmetic progression, which is at a lower rate, right? So he said that the only way to increase prosperity is by controlling the growth of the population. So here this becomes very important. He said that the only solution there is to control the human population growth, because apparently they're growing at an exponential rate. So he came up with two solutions: positive checks and preventive checks. So by positive checks, he means that natural disasters, which naturally cause people to die in masses. So such as earthquakes, tsunamis, cyclones, these are all examples of natural disasters, and thus positive checks. By preventive checks, he means man-made solutions to control or limit population growth. So, this can be done by either postponing marriage or practicing celibacy, or, sexual abstinence, so that there is no reproduction taking place. The human population growth stops. So this theory was, as you can see, quite bizarre, and it was also proven so, and as a result of which he gained a lot of criticism. So let's look at the criticism. So first, these predictions were false based on certain evidences that were documented. So the population pattern in the latter half of the 19th century and the end of the first quarter of the 20th century in European countries showed that a dramatic trend, that the birth rates had declined and outbreak of epidemic diseases were being controlled. So which this means that birth rates had declined and the outbreak of epidemic diseases had been controlled. As a result, his predictions proved false because both food production and standards of living continued to rise despite rapid growth of population as well. So basically here his theory proved false. Second, he was criticized by liberal and Marxist scholars for asserting that poverty was caused by population growth. So these critics basically argued that the problems like poverty and starvation were not caused by, the growth of human population, rather due to the unequal distribution of economic resources. Since economic resources, as we know, are scarce or limited, but people's wants are unlimited, as a result, those lead to poverty rather than the growth of population. All right. So this was your Malthusian theory. So I have tried to divide it into 4 points, but you can also elaborate it depending on the way in which the question comes. So if it's a longer question, you can expand on any of these points and make it longer. Okay? All right. Okay, guys. So now we move on to the theory of demographic transition. So this is quite an easy theory if you understand the basic concept behind it. So these two are the most important theories in this chapter. First is your Malthusian theory. The second is the theory of demographic transition. All right. This theory suggests that the population growth is directly linked to the overall levels of the economic development, and that not every society follows a typical pattern of development, and there may be different layers of development, and this is what determines the population growth of that certain country. Okay, so there are primarily three stages. So the first is the primitive or the first stage, which takes place in underdeveloped countries. Then we have the second stage, which takes place in developing countries. Then we have the third stage, which takes place in developed countries. Okay, so now we will see the key features of each of these countries and why they determine the population growth. Okay, so in these, so we will be taking a look at two basic parameters, that is education and health. Of course, along with that, there are many parameters which decide whether a country is developed, developing, and also the population patterns. But here we primarily focus on these two because these are the most fundamental. All right. Okay, so first let's take a look at underdeveloped countries. The birth rate is high. Okay, you need to understand the birth rate is high. Now, why is that? So birth rate is high due to the fact that people are not educated and they are not aware of the advantages of having smaller families. So as a result, the population becomes high due to higher rates of reproduction. Second, the death rate is also high in these cases because to the lack of good health facilities, good health and medical facilities, often there is a higher chance of acquiring a disease, and as a result, the mortality rate rises in such countries. Okay, next we come to stage 2, in which takes place in developing countries. So in these countries, the birth rate is high due to illiteracy. So you need to understand that people here are semi-educated, we can say. So some of the population is educated, however, a majority of the population is still illiterate, and as a result, also due to the prevalence of patriarchal societal norms and things like male child preference, these may be as a result, the birth rate becomes high, because in case a family has a girl child, they will try for a male child the next time, right? So things like these backward notions are a result of factors such as illiteracy. So therefore, this is what leads to a higher birth rate. Next, we have the death rate is lower because of good health facilities. So since these are developing countries, medical facilities are developing, infrastructure is developing, so there are good health facilities available, so the death rate falls down. Okay, next we finally come to the developed stage 3, which is for developed countries. So here the birth rate is also low as well as the death rate. Birth rate is low because people are educated in these sectors. In these countries, they have high levels of educations, and not just that. Okay, so along with that, there is also prevalence and use of contraceptives, birth control, and all. They are all popularized, and there is a sense of awareness in the society and the masses. So as a result, the birth rate becomes low. Now, death rate is also low because, of course, there are advanced health and medical facilities available in such countries. Now, a very important concept comes about population explosion here. Now, this takes place in stage 2, that is in developing countries. So here, whenever there is a high birth rate and low death rate, population explosion happens. We'll talk about this later also when we discuss the key terms, and this is a very important topic. We'll be taking it up. So population explosion happens whenever there is high birth rate and low death rate. And there is also demographic dividend, that is when the working population increases more than the non-working population. So these are two important factors, two very important concepts that we need to take into mind. One is population explosion and second is demographic dividend, which happens in developing countries in stage 2 due to high birth rate and low death rate. Now we'll be talking about these two concepts in the next part of the video. So where we discuss the important terms and some important concepts in detail. So yeah, do subscribe to the channel and comment down below if you guys have any queries. I'll try to respond as soon as I can. So I'll be posting the videos hopefully by next week. So do keep an eye out for the second part of this video. Alright, thank you so much.